Hello class. In the last video, I talked to you about how to use a couple of different types of resistors to get different sorts of textures to help you primarily with greenery, grass, shrubbery, trees, things of that nature to embellish your picture some. In today's video, I'm going to go over a couple more tricks on how to get some of the texturing on the building, if you so choose, and some of the detail work, as well as going over color schematics for those that are wanting to add color to this picture rather than having it be monochromatic. So a couple of tricks that I want to go over. In addition to using a paintbrush and paint, you have the option of also using like water-soluble markers. Not permanent markers, mind you, but like regular Crayola type markers are water-soluble, so you can actually use this also in watercolor painting. For example, I'm going to do just a quick little demonstration here. This allows me to get a really fine tip, so I could do things like shutters and add detail. And as long as I match the color up, it would work just fine. But kind of another trick that you can do with water solubles, which is basically the opposite of the resistors like last time, is that I can use the water then to spread and manipulate and soften those lines to match my image better. This works particularly well if you are trying to make your house look a little more spooky, and we'll go over some of that. Okay. Do that one more time, and then I can go back over with water, soften, and spread that out. How that works? Works pretty well. That color is pretty similar. It's going to work into the color schematic that I'm using, so I might use this pen a little bit more on the house itself. It might help just with a little bit of texture, shingles, shutters, things like that. I'm going to put some up in my roof here, and I don't want to overthink it too much, but I am going to put in. Notice that I have my reference handy while I'm working on this substantially. I'm going to keep the lines going the same direction. In this case, they're going to be parallel with the roof there. And if it's too bold, or I don't like it, I simply just use a little bit of water, and I'll soften up those lines so that they're not too bold anymore. You can go the opposite direction to soften it also. It can be really handy for detail work. I just softened it just a little bit, just a hint of the shutters there. There might be places where I decide not to put in detail like that, but several people have asked about things like that. Can also be helpful for small detailed areas, inside window panes and things like that. If you didn't want to use a pen and you don't want it to be soluble, a colored pencil that matches the color that you're using also works really well. The pencil won't degrade with water on top of it, so you can actually do really fine detail work with it. Some of you may still have pencil lines in place from when you did your initial tracing. You can erase those if you don't like them. You can embellish your picture with colored pencil some also. And that helps with finite details, fine tip that you're not ever going to get with a paintbrush. And you can embrace that. It's okay for it to not to be a totally fine tip in some cases. It's just kind of the nature of watercolor. Okay. But if there are pencil marks in there, maybe I replace them with the colored pencil instead of the regular pencil shade there. What I really want to get to in this video, though, is color schematic. Color wheel is a painter's best friend. Okay, you're probably familiar with it, or you have songs memorizing red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. Okay, but what's handy about a color wheel is that very quickly you can see which colors go well together. So we're going to talk about a couple of color schematics. You should be well familiarized with monochromatic color schemes by now. Okay. Complementary color schemes are color schemes that are opposite on the color wheel. So in my case, I've got purples, which means that yellow would be a great complement to it. Opposites, just like in magnetism, are wonderful, work wonderful together. So purple and yellow are opposites. Blue and orange, that's maybe one of my favorite color schematics to use as a complementary with blue and orange. And every variation of orange. So orange, really light orange, really dark orange. Blue, really light blue, really dark blue. It still counts as complementary as long as they're the opposites on there. Okay? Complementary is great for making things pop. Okay? Because they're opposites, they pop from each other. However, opposites, when they're blended together, also nullify and become more muted. So I'll maybe demonstrate that in a minute. An analogous color schematic. Okay, analogous means close to. So in this case, this fall landscape has colors orange all the way up through a lime green. And you can see that those are the colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. In this quadrant, and over here. Okay. Warm color schematic means that you're using primarily colors that are found on this half, the warm half of the color spectrum, and vice versa. A cool color schematic means that you're using colors primarily on this half of the color schematic, your blues and your greens. So some of the color schematics, again, complementary, monochromatic, analogous, warm, cool, and a triadic. A triadic means a combination of three colors, and they're typically evenly spaced on the color wheel. So probably the most well-known triadic is the primary colors, red, yellow, blue. Evenly spaced on the color wheel, they work wonderfully together. However, you can take that whole thing and shift it over also. The opposites would be the secondaries. Orange, purple, and green is a secondary triadic, and it's also works really well together, oranges, purples, and greens. Or the in-betweeners, yellow-orange, red-violet, and blue-green. Those three are evenly spaced on the color wheel and work marvelously together. So you should decide what sort of color schematic you want to use. Painters very, very commonly will narrow their color schematic to a dyadic or a triadic, and then just use the different variations of lightness and darkness in that. Okay? It's not necessary to use every single color in the color wheel. It's much more effective to be selective. So let's demonstrate some of that. Now last time I asked everybody to go through and just paint monochromatically. I want to show you how quickly I can turn this into a dyadic. I hit my shadows and my dark areas with a dark color last time, and I used different variations. This time I'm going to go back in, I'm going to hit my highlights, but I'm going to do it with an opposite type color. Not quite opposite. I'm going to go kind of a warm color schematic here. I'm going to go yellow, but I'm also going to add just a tinge of orange into it. Clean my brush in between, sorry. There we go. And I want a little more pigment than that. Mixing it up over here, not on my paper. Notice it's in a clean spot. It's important to have your palette clean before you're mixing your colors together. Okay, good. Darken that up a little more. Okay, good. And I'm actually going to thin this out as I go. So I'm going to clean my brush real quick. here's some tricks, and this is going to seem a little risky, so I'm going to have a paper towel close by just in case. But I want to make my house look a little spooky, so I'm actually intentionally going to fade this a little bit. And ideally, I'd even have a bigger brush to do this. But what I'm going to do, it's going to seem a little risky, is I'm actually going to just go right over the top just with some water, and I'm going to intentionally fade it. And that will actually drag a little bit of the color that I already have there and soften everything. It also gives it kind of this murky or foggy tinge. So if you're trying to make a spooky home, that works pretty well for it. And it's very rapid. Okay, what I'm going to do on top of this now is I want to add in kind of my opposite color here. And I'm going to go into my highlighted areas. And just very, very quickly, now that that's a little bit wet, go into my highlighted areas and do the opposite. I'm working very quickly on it. Okay. If it mixes a little bit, that's okay. But I may not want it to bleed too much, so I'm being kind of careful with where I'm putting it down. This is called a wash, when you just kind of go over quickly and lightly with the color over a large area. So I'm just doing a wash there. I haven't decided what I'm doing with my background yet, so I'm going to lift that just a little bit right there. Notice that a little bit of color goes a really long ways. That color is not very saturated, and it is only maybe a value 1 on my value scale. So I'm just adding a little bit of color. I don't want to change the overall value of what I did last time. It looks so nice, right? See how much it pops when I put that opposite color on there? If I think I got too much color on something, that's why I keep a paper towel close at hand, and I'll just kind of lift it out. Every time. Every time that bow goes off. Okay. You can see that this doesn't take nearly as long. Last time, since I spent all that time making sure I got my values right, now adding the color on top is actually very, very quick. Again, I've chosen just to hit my highlights on it. Very briefly, the reason this pops so much and works so well to use opposite type colors together is it makes it pop. But your eyes actually do this optical illusion thing where if you see a yellow color, the shadow on that yellow color, your eye will actually manipulate it and see it more as the opposite color. So even if a shadow is kind of gray, if it's sitting on an orangey yellow, it's going to turn out kind of purple in your field of vision. So complements work really, really well for making things pop. Okay. And I'm being kind of selective as to where I put things. Highlights mostly. If you wanted to keep just some whites, that's okay also, but did you see how quickly we can get that into place? I can be intentional with where I use my opposite colors also. For example, my house has a lot of shadows and purples in it, but then if I went to texture the grass, like last time I did the purple with the resistors, remember that? And then I pulled some of it out. This is where the rubber cement was. I can do the same sort of thing here and go right over the top. Oops. and just hit my highlights like that also. And that works wonderfully. See how that's getting kind of like a dry grass sort of feel? And the highlights there will stick to the areas that were once protected by the rubber cement that you then wiped out. So that's another wonderful way to just add some color and variety to the foreground of your project. Okay, so now that you have those things in place, please choose your color schematic. If you have questions about color schematics, try looking some up. The internet's full of beautiful color palettes, designers that have already pulled together colors that work marvelously together. Okay, I recommend either a complementary color scheme or a triadic. You can look at the color wheel, I'll have it up in the room. You can use texturing tricks, resistor tricks. You can use solvent tricks, like with a marker or colored pencil. But add detail to your project and add variety to your project. And check the rubric to determine what it is that you need to do well on the project, but more importantly, try out some of these techniques. Try them out on a separate piece of paper first so that you can get comfortable with them. Oh, that turned out lovely, that texture there, before you do it on your final project. Okay, do some experimentation and have fun.